Hyperion by Dan Simmons is a staple in classic sci-fi. I've heard many people rank this among their favorite series of all time, and I finally read it after this copy right here has been sitting on my shelf and staring at me for years. In this video, I'll be giving a brief overview of the story, what it's about, and then going into what I liked, what I didn't like, and kind of ranking the individual stories that are in Hyperion. I won't be going into any spoilers, so if you haven't read the book, you should be safe to watch this video. Hopping right into the overview, this book here is often pitched as a sci-fi version of the Canterbury Tales. That novel being about many different people on a common pilgrimage together. Hyperion has a similar structure and setup as we follow 7 people as they go on what is called the Final Shrike Pilgrimage to meet this mythical being named the Shrike. Hyperion just throws you right into the world, and there's no glossary or terms in the back of the book, so you'll have to work for a while to really accept all this terminology and make sense of it as you read through the book. I want to discuss a few of these major terms and aspects of the book right here just to kind of give you an overview, because I'll be using them quite a bit going forward. The first thing you should know about is the Shrike. The Shrike is this godlike being, a construct of metal and blades. It's a really big unknown factor in this universe that Dan Simmons has created, and the being resides on the world Hyperion, near this location called the Time Tombs, which are surrounded by fields that have the location actually moving backwards in time. Many people fear the Shrike as it goes out and will just kill people en masse. Many people just believe it's a myth. There's even an organization called the Church of the Shrike that worship this being and call it the Lord of Pain. If there's one thing that's for certain, it's that we don't get all the information about the Shrike here in just this first book in the Hyperion Cantos, so I'll definitely be reading forward in the series to know more about this creature. Outside of the Shrike, I want to talk about humans in the universe of the Hyperion Cantos. The humans are largely separated into 2 groups. There's a hegemony of man and the ousters, and I'll start by focusing on the hegemony of man. The hegemony of man spans over 200 worlds, which are all connected through a network called the World Web. Being a part of the World Web means that these worlds have Farcaster portals, which are rifts in space-time that allow one to travel from one location to another instantaneously. Most all of the pilgrims here we follow are a part of the hegemony, and really it just spans most of humanity. Now, the other organization of humans is called the Ousters, and I'm kind of using the term humans lightly here because the Ousters have actually kind of evolved past what humanity is as we know it today. The Ousters themselves separated from old Earth long before the hegemony left, and have kind of been doing their own thing, living between worlds and having their own planets outside of the hegemony. I don't want to give you a ton of information about the Ousters because there's still a lot of unknowns for me, and they're definitely a mystery of this book. Really, I just wanted to let you know that the Ousters are viewed as the main opposition to the hegemony of man and a serious threat to them. Okay, now with that overview out of the way, I want to talk about what I liked, some issues, and definitely some surprises I had while reading Hyperion. I'll talk more about the pilgrims as I go and rank each of the stories after this segment. So first off, this whole universe and the world of Hyperion itself are very fascinating. There's a lot of cool things going on here, and each story really serves to expand this universe more and more in unique ways. There's some stuff like AI that is very interesting in this book. A long time ago, the AI kind of separated from humanity, and we have just let them go off and do their own thing. They're called the Technocore, but they're still integral to how the hegemony functions, and without them, humanity would just kind of be in a very bad place. But it's very interesting how they're kind of off doing their own thing, and people in the book openly acknowledge that the AI is definitely more intelligent than humanity at this point. They are very good at predicting events that are to come, but they don't really view them, the AI, as a threat so much right now. One of the other things that I really liked here is that Dan Simmons is really good at writing in regards to changing the prose between each of these stories and having each character have their own voice. Each of the 6 stories that we get here in Hyperion has such a different tone and way it's told to the reader. Some of the stories, like the third one, are very funny, have a lot of humor in it, and it feels more like you're being directly told a story, while a lot of the other ones kind of feel like you're just reading this account and not like somebody's actually directly telling you a story. The book is also just jammed to the brim with ideas. There is so much going on here. With each of these stories, it brings in new ideas and themes, and then there's the whole connective tissue and the narrative between the stories that also has ideas of its own and kind of the more overarching plot line. Now, I definitely want to talk about issues too, because this book was not perfect for me. And some of it's definitely just down to me and my reading preferences. One of the major things is that this book is composed of like 6 main short stories. And I like short stories, but it is not my preferred format. I'm very much so a momentum-based reader. I like to get lost in my stories and just keep going and going. But with short stories or collections of short stories, you kind of finish one and then you have that break in momentum. It's easier to put the book down, maybe step away for a couple days and then come back and pick it up later. So that did make it a little bit of a slower read for me. Sometimes I'd sit down and read a whole story at once, but sometimes I'd put the book down and not really listen to it or read it for a couple days, then come back when I'm ready for it. I will say though that there is a lot of cool connective tissue between these stories. There is that narrative between them that really ties them all together. And trying to think about really what is the common thread through all of these stories that were being told kept things more interesting and did have me pushing forward a bit more than I would with other short story collections. I also want to talk about some things that surprised me. One is that this book is very literary. It has so many references to poetry, specifically John Keats, and I'm not really familiar with Keats. I don't have the most knowledge of poetry either, so some of that I feel like went a bit over my head. I think I should do some research and come back and reread this book down the line, and I'd probably get more value out of it then. Another thing was just how horny Dan Simmons' writing can get. I read this book with about 5 to 7 other people, and we were all surprised. We're like, wow, he gets pretty crude and a lot of sexual descriptions in a lot of this. And none of that really bothers me at all. It's just kind of surprising to me. I didn't expect that at all in here. All right, and now we get to the real meat of things here. I'm gonna go through the 6 stories, starting with my least favorite and then going up to my favorite, kind of ranking them and generally talking about them as I go. I don't want to mention anything that would be considered spoilers here really, so you're safe to keep watching if you haven't read the book still. Starting off, we have what is certainly my least favorite story in the entire book, and all my friends would generally agree that this was the lowest part of the book for them as well. And that is story 2, told by Colonel Fedman Cassad, and it's The War Lovers. In this story, you really follow Colonel Cassad and his rise to kind of being a well-known figure in the galaxy. And there's a lot of combat here, a lot of action. You bounce all around his life, and it felt like it was pretty disjointed to me, honestly. It was kind of jumping back and forth between different parts of his life, and that was not my favorite thing ever. And sometimes I like combat in books, things like The Blade itself or John Gwynne. Those are great action. There's great action in those. But I honestly don't really like the action the most from Dan Simmons, so I didn't really care that much for a lot of the story. This is probably the most sexual of all the stories because, as the title implies, it's The War Lovers. The romance here was actually my favorite part of the whole thing because it's pretty mysterious. There's this figure that the Colonel meets, and he can only see this other person every so often, and he doesn't really understand why or how he's able to connect to this other person, but the two of them have this very intimate, charged relationship that plays out through the length of the story. There's a lot of focus on the hegemony's military here, which is called Force. There's different aspects of Force, such as Space Force or like Ground Force, so you really just get to see more of the world fleshed out in the military aspect. There's also some interesting aspects about religion here. Cassad is Palestinian, and he has to make some tough choices later on, which kind of cement his fame also. Yeah, there's still some good stuff in here, but in my eyes, this is definitely the worst of the bunch. Next up is story number 5, told by Braun Lamia, who was a detective. This one is called The Long Goodbye. In this tale, we follow the character Braun Lamia as she worked as a private investigator, specifically working with one of her clients who is a cybrid. So a cybrid's a pretty interesting thing in this book. It's a human body, but there's the AI remotely in the Technocore that can control it and interface more through it as a human would. I don't want to talk too much about the identity of the cybrid or more about them because that's definitely one of the major things here in the story that you should read about. But this tale overall is definitely a noir detective tale. There's actually quite a bit of action too in this one, and there's also kind of a love story here as well. My favorite part about this story is we got to explore AI in the most depth out of probably any of these, and it really fleshed out the technocore, things like cybrids a lot more, and that was definitely really interesting to read about. But some of the stuff with just kind of Braun Lamia doing her detective work and following around the cybrid trying to figure things out wasn't my favorite, but kind of towards the end of the story, a lot more interesting world stuff is revealed and told to the reader. Although I'm placing story 5 on the same tier as story 2 here, it is definitely a big step above it in my mind. Next up, we're jumping to the next tier of stories, which are about equal in my mind. I don't really place one above the other. I'm going to start with story 6 though, which is told by the Consul, who is also the main character we follow between the stories. His tale is the last one in the book, and it's called Remembering Siri. I blasted through this one in one sitting, and I really enjoyed it quite a bit. Some of these stories, while it's being told by a character like the Consul, the meat of the short story itself is actually centered on another person. The person always explains, to understand my story, you have to know this other one. So to start with, you kind of get the Consul setting it up by telling the people, to understand my story, you need to first understand the story of Marin Aspec. Marin is a ship worker on this major ship that helps build Farcaster portals on worlds that are not yet a part of the world web. And because of this, travel to these worlds takes an extremely long time, because as I mentioned, there's no Farcaster portals, so they can't just warp there. Something I didn't really mention in the world building part of Hyperion is this idea of time debt and how long it takes to travel. Some of these locations are so far apart that traveling to them, if you don't have a Farcaster portal, takes an extremely long amount of time. And these ship workers are paid extremely well because of this idea of time debt. So essentially, Marin's traveling on the ship, and he goes into like stasis for a lot of the journey, and then when he arrives, he helps work on the Farcaster portals. But during that time, while he's on stasis and the ship is traveling, time is just moving at a normal speed everywhere else, and they're traveling a super long distance. So a lot of time passes between what Marin experiences versus everywhere else experiences because he's in stasis for so long. So at the heart of the story really is Marin falling in love with this character Siri, and how he comes back to this world, Maui Covenant, to work on a Farcaster there because they're setting this world up to join the hegemony. And I think it only for him is going to take like a couple of years to really build this Farcaster portal. But for Siri, his lover, it's going to take her whole entire life. So you see 5 years pass for him, and for Siri, it's about like 65 years pass for her. And it's a really interesting tale of these lovers that are literally like spanned across time, even though from Marin's point of view, their love has not been even that long, but these two love each other. It's a really fascinating setup, and just how things play out is really cool here. Really, the themes of this one are hard to discuss without getting too much into spoilers, because all this ends up playing into the Consul. So he tells the story of Marin first, and then after that, he tells his own story, which is shorter, but you start to understand him as a character a lot more. This character we've been following the most out of any of the characters in the book. And it was really awesome. So many cool reveals happen here, and you just get to understand this damaged man a lot more. Now I'm going to talk about story 3, which is told by Martin Silenus. It's called The Poet's Tale, or Hyperion Cantos. And this is about on the same level as story 6 for me. This is a totally different tone though, because Martin Silenus is kind of like the comic relief in this book. He's a poet. He says a lot of absurd things. He gets on everybody's nerves. He's pretty funny. And this tale really was the funniest one of the whole bunch. This really follows Martin's artist's journey throughout the years. The man's been alive for a very long time. I won't really get too much into it, but he's seen a lot. He's gone through a lot. He's been rich, he's been poor, he's been rich again. He's experienced all these things. He found his muse, he lost his muse, and he found a new muse. so you really go on this whole artist's journey with the man. Out of all the stories here, this is definitely the one too where it feels the most like somebody telling you a story directly. Sometimes in the middle of the story, Martin will like outwardly speak to somebody in the group. It just has a feeling more like this man is telling the others a story, so it's kind of like meta fourth wall breaking inside of the story itself here. This is a story I was actually kind of dreading getting to because initially I didn't find Martin the funniest, and I found a lot of his kind of poetical outbursts to not be my favorite things, but I actually really ended up liking story 3 here quite a bit, and I don't want to talk about it too much more because I think this one is kind of hard to talk about without too many spoilers because just so much happens in this tale. Okay, now we move to the last tier, which is the really, really good stuff in my mind. And the first one up here is story 4, told by Saul Weintraub, The Scholar's Tale, or River Lelith's Taste is Bitter. This is probably the saddest story of the bunch. It didn't move me to tears, but I've seen a lot of people online saying that this story made them cry multiple times. Maybe if I was a parent, you know, I have my dog over there, but maybe if I had like a kid, I would find this more emotionally gut-wrenching. It was sad, don't get me wrong, but it did not bring me to tears. So our character here, Saul Weintraub, is a Jewish professor, and he's kind of unique among the pilgrims as he brought another person along with him, his young daughter, Rachel. This story really revolves all around Saul Weintraub's family and his daughter, Rachel. And I don't want to say too much about his daughter because that's really one of the major things about this story. And the setup for the story happens pretty early on, and then you kind of watch things play out afterwards. And that takes you right up to the kind of the start of the book here, where the pilgrimage begins. It's hard to say too much more about this because this story really revolves around this infant and why she's here, how she came to be here. So I really want you to experience this setup moment that I'm talking about yourself, and then really kind of see how things play out, because it's pretty fascinating. All right, and now time for the last story. My favorite story out of all of the 6 is actually the first one. Story number 1, The Man Who Cried God, told by the Catholic priest Leonard Hoyt. This one's really good, and it's nice that it's at the start because it makes the book really sink its fangs into you, but I also find it kind of sad that for me, the book peaked at the first story, and then after that I was hoping for something just as good, but nothing quite hit this high for me. So this is another tale where Leonard Hoyt sets us up by saying, to really understand why I'm here, you actually need to understand this story of this guy, Paul Dury. A lot of this story focuses on Catholicism, and in the world of Hyperion, Catholicism is almost like a dying religion. It's, you know, peak era is gone past, and now there's kind of these last fragments that are trying to keep the religion alive and trying to maybe renew it in some kind of way. For the majority of this tale, we're following the journal of Paul Dury and his journey through Hyperion to try to find this group called the Bakura. And I think this tale did a great job really setting Hyperion up as an interesting world to be on. There's a lot of really interesting things here that are unique to the world. Things called like the electric forest, where these trees that generate massive amounts of electricity and will like fry anything that goes through there, and just a bunch of interesting organisms and locations that he has to travel through to try to find the Bakura. So all of that was great, but where this story started getting really good is when Dury makes contact with the Bakura and starts investigating them more. Things get really interesting and crazy and kind of horrific, and it really has this kind of thriller mystery aspect that pulls you through these pages and makes story 1 definitely my favorite story here. I love cosmic horror and just kind of sci-fi horror, and this story just knocks it out of the park on that front. This one is also very interesting in the way that the story of Paul Dury talks to the guy that's telling it, Leonard Hoyt, and how that all kind of ties together at the end. I will say, out of all the stories, this one felt like Leonard Hoyt is kind of like the least connected to the other of the pilgrims. A lot of the other pilgrims seem more tied to one another than Hoyt does to everybody else, but it's very interesting and definitely my favorite out of all the 6 stories here. All right, now that I've covered all of the 6 stories, it's time to give Hyperion overall a ranking. And I'm going to go ahead and give Hyperion a 4.0 out of 5. I liked the book quite a bit, but it's not my favorite thing. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't points that I had friction with, especially story 2. That one drug for me. And some of the connective tissue It was fine, but it wasn't like gripping me too much. But some of these stories really were fantastic and amazing. Like story 1 is like a 5 out of 5 for me. Absolutely was floored by it. I will be doing a spoiler discussion on my podcast, which will get posted here on the YouTube channel. In a couple of weeks here, I'm going to have a book club meeting with a bunch of my other friends who all read this book with me, and that's really where we'll go through each story, talk about the spoilers, get really in depth, talking about our thoughts about this book. But for now, I really want to hear what you guys have to say about Hyperion. Have you read it? What's your favorite story? Give me your rankings of the story, and if you haven't read it, let me know if you're interested in it more now that you watch this video. That's it for today. Maybe leave a thumbs up too, and hit subscribe if you like this video and want more book content, mostly in the realm of sci-fi and fantasy. Have a good one.